Hi students, it's Mr. Win here. Today I'm going to show you how to solve quadratic equations using the square root method. Okay, so you use this method when your equation is in perfect square form. Right, perfect square would be like one side of the equation is perfect square, right? Like for example, this one right here. So this is a simple example. There is a square root property that you do need to keep in mind that square root property says that whenever you're taking the square root of a number, you will end up with a positive version and a negative version of that root. So that's it's just telling you that you're gonna have two solutions. Okay, so when you're doing a square root method, keep in mind you have a positive solution and a negative or a minus solutions. Okay. All right. So for this one, we know we're gonna take the square root on both sides, right? Take square root over here, square over here, and we apply the not zero product. We apply the um, square root property to that number. So we're gonna end up with q equal plus or minus the square root of 25. But the square root of 25, the square root of 25 happens to be 5. So we're going to end up with a positive value of 5 or a negative value of 5 that would make this equation true. So our solutions would be those two numbers. The positive, you don't have to put the plus sign, but the negative, you do have to put the minus sign. Okay. Submit. All right. So these are easy problems. All right, for this one, same thing. We're going to follow the rule. We're going to take square root on both sides. So this will be plus or minus the square root of negative 49. Well, whenever you have a negative inside the square root, you automatically have an imaginary number because the square root of negative 49 is technically the square root of 49 times the square root of 1, or negative 1 rather, negative 1. And from the previous class that we learned that a square root of negative 1 represent the imaginary number. We designated the I to represent the square root of negative 1 just so that we can run machines and computers and things won't break, right? We assign that negative square root an I. So this equation, even though the solutions are not real numbers, we still have the solutions, and the solutions are considered imaginary solutions, right? So this square root of 49 happens to be 7, right? So we have plus or minus 7i. All right, we have to include the I to tell people that it is an imaginary value. Okay, so we're gonna put this in here as 7i and negative 7i. Submit. Awesome, awesome. Okay, same thing. I'm gonna skip. This was the exact same thing. Actually, I'm gonna actually do this one because the square root of 75 is not as nice a number as the square root of 49. So I'm gonna, sorry, that's my alarm again. So I'm gonna actually work this one out. Okay, same thing as we did before. Take the square root on both sides. We're gonna end up with q equals to the plus or minus the square root of negative 75. And we already know that negative is going to give us an I, right? Okay. And so we have plus or minus the positive version of square root of 75. All right, guys, you have to simplify the square root of 75. And if you are in Algebra 2, you should remember how to do it. But if just in case anyone who doesn't remember, your calculator is a great tool. I can show you how to split this up and all of that stuff. But today I'm going to use technology to show you how you can simplify square root of 75, okay? You go to y equals, and you want to type in 75 divided by x squared. And why x squared? Because we're looking for the square root. So we're dividing by the x squared, right? And then we go to the table, second graph. Sorry, that's the bell again. On the x column, this would be our whole value. On the y column, this would be our radical. Okay, so if I scroll down, I know 1 and 75 is no use because that's the same as my square root of 75. So when you scroll down on this table, you want to look for the smallest possible y value, but as a whole number. So look for the smallest possible y value as a whole number. Let's see, I can't go any further, right? That is all decimal, so I don't want that. So 5 root 3 is my answer. 5 is on the outside, and square root of 3 is on the inside. And then the I, right? Now, there are a few things, there are a couple of ways you can write this solution, right? You can write it as what I just did here. This is perfectly acceptable with the I sort of like separated from the square root. However, a lot of time people write the I too close to the square root, and then it looks like it's inside the square root. So to combat that misunderstanding or that problem, that potential issue, we ask that student write the I with the real number or with the whole number and then the square root at the end. This way, there is no misunderstanding where the I is supposed to be. Okay, so this is fine, this is acceptable, but this is more careful. Okay, so our solution here is going to be positive 5I root 3, and then this one will be negative 5I root 3. All right, so keep that in mind. All right, awesome. All right, we also talked about number of solutions when we are doing square root. Okay, so we know when we square root a positive number like 9, we're going to get two answers, a plus 3 and a minus 3. So that's two solution. That's this one right here, two real solution, right? When we square root a negative 9, we're going to get two solution as well, but we know our answer is going to have an I in it. So if this is the case, so this is two real solution. This is the case where we have two imaginary solution, okay? It doesn't mean no solution. So no solution is never applicable. No real solution is applicable, but when you say no solution, it's not applicable. It's actually two imaginary solution. And when do I get one solution? I get one solution when I'm square rooting a 0. When I square root a 0, it's just 0 because 0 doesn't have plus or minus. So 0 is just 0. So when I'm square rooting a 0, I know I'm going to have a one solution. So if you look at this problem, you're going to end up square rooting a positive 11, right? So when you square root a positive number, you're always going to end up with two real solutions. So that is going to be our answer. Okay. Again, two real solution. I'm going to skip if it keeps repeating. Yeah, it is. All right, this one, well, this one is not tricky, but it's got that negative. So all you have to do is move the negative over here to make D positive. So you're going to take the square root of negative 49, right? Plus or minus the square root of negative 49. And we did this one earlier. The answer was plus or minus 7I, right? So I'm going to skip that question. Okay, clear, skip. What else do we have? What? It's the same question. Why do they want to? I think they really want me to work it out. So I'm just going to enter the solution here so they can leave me alone and skip that problem. Be fun if I missed that. All right, so here's the case where you have one solution because you're going to end up moving the 43 over here by subtracting 43, right? So when you subtract 43, you end up with a 0. And so when you square root both sides, you're going to end up square rooting a 0. Well, square root of a 0 is a 0, so you're going to end up with just one real solution, which is 0, right? So that is the only case where you have one real solution, okay? Select, submit, repeat, skip. This one is not too bad, but it is a little tricky because it is a fraction. So I'm gonna show you how to deal with this. So first, you always want to get your perfect square by itself. So 64w is going to be w squared is going to be by itself. So I'm moving the 1 by adding it to 0. I'm also going to move the 64 because I want w to be by itself. Remember, the perfect square has to be by itself. So I'm going to divide by 64, okay, on both sides. So this 64 will go away, and then I get w squared equals 1 over 64. Now, we know we're going to be taking square root on both sides, so we're going to end up with plus or minus, right, two solution, the square root of 1 over 64. Well, this is not too bad. You just take the square root separately, and our number is positive, so we're all good, right? So the answer is plus or minus the square root of 1 over the square root of 64. Well, the square root of 1 happened to be 1 over, okay, keep it as a fraction. It is a fraction. It's going to end up being a fraction. Square root of 64 is 8. And I already have plus or minus, so I don't need to do that again, right? I already have two answers. So my solution is positive 1 over 8 and negative 1 over 8. So I'm going to enter that over here. 1 over 8. I think they want me to use the fraction bar. 1 over 8. I don't think it's necessary, but I'm going to use this just to be safe. This one is actually negative. So I press my negative first, and then 1 over 8. I think we're good to go. Yes. Awesome. This one, the same kind of, but this one is a negative number. So I'm going to isolate u squared by dividing by 100, right? So I'm going to end up with negative 1 over 100. Then I'm going to end up taking square root on both sides, correct? Square root on both sides. So I'm going to be doing plus or minus. Remember, the students sometimes forget this. That's the property. Negative 1 over 100. Well, the minute you see that negative 1, you can go ahead and give yourself an I. Okay? That negative square root is going to be an I. And then do the square root separately. So u equals plus or minus the square root of 1 over the square root of 100. All right. So the square root of 100 happens to be 10. Okay, so u equals plus or minus the square root of 1 is 1. So I end up with 1 over 10 I as my answer. Okay, so that's how I'm going to write it. Positive 1 over 10 I, and then negative 1 over 10 I. Okay, so I'm going to write it like this. Positive 1 over 10, and then move out. Make sure you move out. Don't put the I on the bottom. The I is supposed to be on the side like that. And then negative 1 over 10, and then move out to the side and put an I in there. All right, and we're good. Okay. This one is also a tough one, but it's similar to the one we just did, right? So we're going to move the 44 over here and then divide him by 64, so or negative 64. So I'm going to do this one, and I think this might be the last problem I'm working, or I don't know. I'll skip ahead and see what else we see. So it become positive, and then I divide by 64 or negative 64. Divide by negative 64. So you know your solution is going to be imaginary because you're going to end up square rooting a negative value, right? But before I do that, I want to simplify that number first. I want to simplify. So I want to go to my calculator, do, oops, get out of there. Do 44 divide by 64. I know my answer is negative, so I'm going to keep the negative in there. And then I convert it to fraction. It's going to give me a smaller fraction. So it's 11 over, oh wait, negative 16. So that's my solution, right? So now I'm going to take square root. I'm going to do square root. So r is equal to plus or minus the square root of 11 over negative 16. All right. So when you have that negative there, you give yourself an I in your solution, right? Give yourself an I. Every time you have a negative in the square root, give yourself an I. And then take the, simplify the square root. So you're going to have square root of 11, which is already done. You cannot simplify that. However, the square root of 16 turned out to be 4. So there are again a few different ways to write this solution. This is acceptable, okay? However, this is actually better. And I really don't have a problem with how you want to write this. So 1/4 I is that part right there. And then square root of 11. I know it looks really weird, but that's actually a more conventional way to write your solution. Now, I am going to try putting it in this way to see if IXL actually accepts that, right? Because it is correct, it's not wrong. So we're going to try it the first way, okay? So we're going to do the positive version, so it's a fraction, and on top is a square root of 11. On the bottom is a 4. This is actually faster to write. And then there's an I there. And then the minus version, so negative, parentheses, not parentheses, fraction, square root of 11 over 4, and then an I at the end. Oops, I can use that I. I'm going to use this I. I don't know if it matters. But there it is. So I'm going to hit submit to see if it accepts this solution. If it does, then it's probably better for you to use this, right? Submit. Yay, it did. Okay, I wasn't surprised because it should. This is a one real solution. We already done this. So, all right, skip along, skip along, skip along to see if we get anything more interesting. Not really. Just combine like terms. So it's the same thing. So you want to combine this over here, move the 4 back, and divide, right? So I think we're good here. Most of the problems after this is probably going to be like that, where you have to combine like terms and then just solve the equation. So anyway, I'm going to stop here, you guys. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.